All right, so let's now work on that shader. Here on the Pyro import, I've cached out just a few frames of what we have so far. And in this volume visualization, I've set it up so that we have density, density, flame, flame, and then an emission scale of 10. Over here in the material context, let's now create a Redshift material builder. And by the way, if you don't have Redshift, I'll show you how to do the same exact thing with Mantra/Karma here in a minute. But with this new material network, let's call this our flame material. Assign it here to the Pyro imports, like that. And then create an RS volume and plug that into the volume output. So now we have this, and if we go to the Redshift render view, we won't see anything yet because we need to go down here towards the bottom and specify flame as our emission channel. So let's say flame right there, re-kick the render, and we should see something show up. And yes, we do. Now, with Redshift, density is not going to be associated with the emission. So we will make these two play nicely here in a little bit, but for right now, let's set this to 0 and our absorption to 0 as well, so that we're just looking at this emission. Now that we have this, I want to create a ramp that looks like this. We start with black. I bring black over to the other side like this. I'll create a marker. This will be red, and I'll bring that over here towards the bottom. I'll make another marker that's yellow right there. And then to get that blue in the picture, we'll go to a value of 1 like that. We'll find ourselves a blue and we'll just saturate it a little bit. So we'll go something kind of like that. So that now we have just a little bit of blue as we start approaching that black area. And also with this value, again, make sure that is a value of 1, like so. And from here, we can adjust things. So with the scale, let's set it to something like 10 for the time being, so that we have that. And I'm going to pause our IPR. Now, this is the point where we want to start creating relative references between what we have here in the shader and what we're currently viewing within this viewport. So with this emission scale, let's copy from the shader. This will be our master control, copy parameter, paste relative reference. And then with this emission color ramp, we'll do the same thing. So copy, paste relative references, like so. We can adjust this a little bit, but that will give us a basic setup to get started with. Now that we have this though, the next step is to remap these values into something that will work a little bit better for this ramp. So we have this functionality built into the Redshift shader here under the Advanced tab. In other words, we're able to fit these flame values into new values by adjusting this. However, I like this to correlate with what we have here on our preview visualization. So the way that I'll do this is I'll create a volume VOP, and this will make sense here in a second. But what I want to do in this volume VOP is, we don't need these two things. I just want to take a bind, there we go, and say bring in flame, and then we'll do a bind export to export flame as well. So we'll say flame right there. And then the only thing we need here is a fit node. So we're just fitting these voxel values into something new. So plug that into the value and then promote the source min max and then the dest min destination max. So that now at the top level we have something like this. And what we can do back at the shader is we can specify these ranges as well. So now let's say our old min copy parameter is going to be this, old max, same deal, and then same thing with the new min and the new max. So that now, as we change this, as you can see, we are changing the viewport preview as well. So let's now go back to our Redshift render view. And now that we have all this set up, we can start playing around with what these values ought to be. As you turn up the new max, we're turning up the flame values so that they begin approaching a value that's closer to 1 and beyond. And you'll notice that as I do this, we start getting those little ghost looking effects within the flame. And when I say ghost, I mean that we're cutting into the flame body. And that's exactly how we're going to do this. It's also how we're going to account for the offset that we have between where the fire is coming from and when it starts to appear out of thin air. So that, again, represents this area of the ramp that we're pushing values towards. As we get past 1, we get to black. That's what's cutting into it. Let's add a little bit more blue into the situation by doing this sort of thing right there. And I'll also saturate this a bit more as well so that we have something around there. Okay. Now, if we go and change this flame to a really high scale, like let's say 100, then as you can see, we're starting to reach an area that is going to look pretty cool. Let's try 75, bring it down to maybe 50. I think probably right around 50 to 75 is going to be good. Again, I'm letting things clip like this, and I'm doing so intentionally because, as we saw in the reference footage, that's what we perceive whenever we look at fire. Now, as we change this new min and max, we have a way of adding how much we're cutting into the flame body, and that's going to be a really effective way of creating that sort of realism that we see throughout the whole thing. Now, as I mentioned before, all this stuff is going to change as we go along. We just want to get this in a general spot, and then from there, we can adjust microsolvers and sourcing and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, the flame's too high, so we'll attack that next. But anyway, I just want to get this basic setup going so that we can get an idea of what we're doing and you can know where we're going as well. If you're using Mantra or Karma, here's what you do to get to the same place. Under the color mode, with this fire section, change that temperature to color ramp. So there's our ramp. Set the temperature scale to 1, like that, and then go to the fire temperature tab right here. Set this to flame, and then check on this fit to range. Here is your source min, source max. This is destination min, destination max. And you can use a relative reference to all these channels that you just saw. So there you go. Same thing, different buttons. That's about all there is to that. In the next video, let's move on by adding our logs as collision objects, and then also work on dialing in the overall shape of these flames.